In today's video, we are going to take a trip out to Applegate Lake and check out Squaw Lake. I will be joined by my Uncle Calvin, who used to work on a farm out there before the lake was built. He will be telling us some stories of how it was when he was a kid. We will be beginning our trip from Jacksonville, where we will gas up the car. Then we will head out to Applegate Lake. Once we get to Applegate Lake, we will cross over the dam and head on up to Squaw Lake. Hello, this is Phil with Applegate Bushcraft Prospecting and Survival. Today we're taking a trip out to Applegate Lake with my Uncle Calvin. He used to work on the farms out there, which are now below the lake, and we'll get to hear a few stories.
Well, I've never...
You are good?
Yeah, I'm an old hippie. I've never smoked marijuana, and I'll never do it again.
Yeah?
No thank you, please. It only makes me sneeze.
You didn't get that on tape, or I got a tap.
Rolling.
Yeah, well, what I remember as a kid, when we would, Mom would either take us into the upper Applegate when I was little for picnics, but I worked the summer of 1957. When I was 14, I worked in a cattle ranch where we're heading in that direction. But we passed by a small city on, used to be called Roosh, and it was it had a one-pump gas station, and they had a glass bowl on the top of the pump, and if you ordered like 5 gallons of gas, they had to hand pump it up, and you could see where you got 5 gallons, and they would gravity feed it into your tank. But what kept the little store open was there was a couple that ran it, was the logging truck drivers, because they were doing a lot of logging on the California side, and they were doing a lot of logging along Squaw Creek, which we're going to go to. But what I remember about this store is that she would cut, my favorite thing was a bologna sandwich with tomato, and she would cut the bologna, I mean, half an inch thick. It was just like a steak of bologna and tomatoes, and I didn't like mustard on it, but she put mayonnaise on it, and a knee-high grape drink, and the whole thing was like 30 cents for the sandwich and for the drink. And then further up into the wilderness was the only other store, or the only city, if you will, because it was called Copper. And again, what kept that alive was the logging truck drivers.
Rolling.
Yeah, so between here and where we're at, the Jacksonville cutoff, there's probably only maybe 20 farms, but they were pretty large farms, and most of them had 100 to 150 acres that they cleared the timber on, and it was flat enough to raise alfalfa and winter rye and the other grasses. And they would bale that, and that'd give them enough feed to where they could keep 100 head of cattle or so over the winter when there was no grass to eat. But usually in the last week of September, all of these little ranches here would all go into Jacksonville and Medford to the cattle auctions, and they would sell all their cattle off, except they always kept their breeding bulls, but they'd just keep enough cows to breed for the next spring, and they would try to breed to where the calves were born in April or May, to where they were big enough to drive up to the Bureau of Land Management spring ranges. And if you paid irrigation taxes, then you could use the state and the federal Bureau of Land Management ranges. And they normally had a spring range, which was close to Squaw Lake. Big, huge natural meadows that they would seed and spray by air to keep them up. And then we called it the winter range for the end of, we were all at the way almost to the California border. But we would drive the cattle into California following the Applegate and then up to, Philip remembered the name of the creek. What was the name of the creek?
Elliott?
Elliott Creek. And at Elliott Creek, we would head due west.
Yeah.
So anyway, the winter range, we would drive them up the second week of August. We'd move the cattle. We'd already have done 2 mowings, hay mowings, on the ranch, and then we'd let the cattle graze after we mowed the hay. We'd let them graze for a couple days, and then we'd put a bell on one of the cows that was born up on the winter range, and we'd get on it was all dirt roads. In fact, this was a dirt road right here back in 57. But we'd put a bell on one of the cows that was born up on the winter range and put her out on the road, and she'd start just automatically up towards the range. And we didn't drive the cattle. What we did, we had a dog, and we had a horse that we had 4 50-pound blocks of salt for the salt licks for the cattle up on the range. And the old man we worked for was kind of crippled up, so my brother and I would take the river side of the road, I would take the brush side, and if the cattle got up into the trees off the road, we'd send the dog in after them. And once in a while, if it was a calf, we'd have to get in and get it back on the road. And the old man would have to be in his pickup ahead of us to stop the logging trucks. Because if they came down and they hit their air horn, we'd have had cows spread over 500 acres. And once we drove the cattle, yeah, we almost made a wrong turn here.
We did make a wrong turn.
I don't know. This says
We're on Palmer Creek now.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It says we're okay. But
Well, this doesn't go through. You're gonna, when you get to the next.
Yeah, yeah. But this is the same GPS that told me to take a left-hand turn in the middle of the Golden Gate Bridge. So I don't have much confidence in it. So, but anyway, we would drive the cattle. It took us about 10 hours. It took about 10 hours to drive the cattle up to the range, and then one of us would have to stay on the range. Yeah. But anyway, we would take, one of us boys would stay up there by ourselves, and just, I mean, absolute wilderness. There wasn't the next human being to the south of us was Happy Camp. To the south of us, there wasn't any other roads. You could walk straight out of that wilderness south and you wouldn't hit a road until you hit the road to Happy Camp. And we'd stay up there, and we were fully armed. We were armed to the teeth. We had a single-shot Stevens 22 rifle, and if any bear got into the cattle and you shot it with that 22, about the only thing it'd do is just piss it off. You know, it would, unless you hit it in the eye or something. And but anyway, that was our summer, and we spent the summer up there. My brother had gotten in trouble with the juvenile authorities, and the deal my dad made was that us two boys would spend, we got out of school a week early for the first hay mowing at this guy's ranch, and we went back to school a week late. So we're up there for a full 90 days. But the deal my dad made was with this guy, he told him all about my brother being a juvenile delinquent, and they sent me up there so my brother wouldn't feel bad. And it turned out to be just one of those life-changing summers of your life, kind of a coming-of-age summer. But we were up there because the old man had arthritis and rheumatism so bad. And I say old, he was 65. And I'm 79 right now, so but he wasn't able to get up on and off the tractors and stuff, so that was our boys' job. We were his muscle and his legs for the summer. And first couple of weeks we were on the ranch, he kind of looked at us, and here, I'm this scrawny 110-pound kid, and my brother Harold was already 6 feet tall at 15 years old. He didn't grow anymore, but looked at us, figured we were city kids, didn't know we were farm kids. And by the end of the first week, he was pretty impressed with our ability to work. And they were Seventh-day Adventists, so we worked 6 days a week. But when the sun came up in the morning, we started working. When the sun went down, we quit working. And we did everything you can imagine on a cattle ranch, from the animal husbandry end. There was this far out of town, there weren't any veterinarians, or if you got hurt yourself, which I did that summer, there are no doctors, so you did your own doctoring. And it was just a wonderful experience. But the very best part of the experience was when we were working the winter range and spending a week up there. And I remember one weekend, I could see a little bit ways from, I was up on the west end of the range, and I could see people coming around the end of French Gulch. And it turned out to be a game warden. His name was Cole Rivers. What a great name for a game warden. And a naturalist. And he had his 2 daughters with him. And one of the daughters was my age. And of course, at 14 years old, you fall in love with the wind when it's blowing. And that really added a lot to my summer. Was they came that weekend, and then the next month they came up another weekend. And if we took a little bit of food with us, but we had fish in the creek, shot a lot of rabbits that summer, snared a lot of rabbits. And it was a self-sufficient thing. And a lot of people would ask my mother, when my mother wrote about in her biography, wrote about some of the wilderness camping that my brother and I did through our teens. They'd ask my mother if she was worried about it. What are you going to do? They're all alone in the wilderness. What are you going to do if they get hurt or something? And she said the whole point is for them to figure it out. Learn how to be self-sufficient. So anyway, that was kind of the summer of '57, and that's the area we're heading. And this road right here was what they called chip seal at that time. It was a dirt road from here on, but they would oil it to keep the dust down. And most 99.9% of the traffic on this road were logging trucks. And the loggers would come the night before up Squaw Creek or further up the upper Applegate, and they would sleep in their trucks all night long, and they'd load them up first thing in the morning, and they would try to make 2 loads into Medford on these roads, because they got $125 a load, so that would be $250 a day back in 1957. And you could buy a house in town for $9,000 back then. So just put that is relative to today's money. So the logging truck drivers, when they were able to haul logs, would really make a lot of money, and they just kept this road full of logging trucks day in and day out. And by the way, having a forest fire up in here that got to be anything any more than a spot fire was unheard of, because the loggers were in the woods. They had chainsaws, they had heavy equipment, and the minute a spot fire was anywhere within a couple of miles of them, they dropped everything and go put that fire out. And they were angels in the woods here that kept the forest fires down. It was absolutely unheard of to have a crown fire in this area where they were logging.
Yeah, it makes more sense to have the loggers taking a little bit out than having the forest fire take it all, you know.
Well, one of the misnomers, if you fly over Oregon and you fly over Northern California, you see these big 680 acre patches. They're called clear cutting, and they're like a perfect square that's cut out of the forest. And you look at that, that's the ugliest thing you've ever seen, but it's the best thing that could ever happen to the forest, because it clears the trees out, lets the grasses grow. It's feed for the deer, it's feed for the elk. And also big companies like Weyerhaeuser, they weren't like these hit and run logging companies. They thought in 50-year blocks for business. And they would hire the Boy Scouts, and they'd hire these volunteer groups to come into especially really sloped areas that they clear cut, and to replant the trees. And they would put the tree bases 16 feet apart from trunk to trunk, and then they'd go in as soon as the trees are about 5 years old, and they would take about 80% of them out to where the tree trunks were no closer than 24 feet, so they wouldn't, the boughs would not touch each other, because that's how the diseases get spread among the trees and things get in the trees. If they're so thick together, like these forests here on both sides of us, are just weed patches. And the fire gets started on the ground with all that dead wood and stuff.
Yeah, so we're going to cross here at
absolutely.
the dam.
But if we kept going straight into the upper Applegate,
well, we can do that on the way back if you want.
Yeah, but now we're going to turn. This is the road. Squaw Creek Road was a dirt road that was not on this side of the river. We're on the west side of the river. There were no bridges after the Jacksonville cutoff. There were no bridges across the Applegate. If you wanted to get to your little farm on the west bank of the Applegate, you had to find a shallow place on the river and ford with your car, or most people park their cars on the east bank, and they would put in footbridges and walk across. And most of the houses on the west bank of the Applegate did not have electricity or telephones. But they had running water, because if you look up in the side of these hills, you can take a half-inch pipe, drill a bunch of holes in it, leave the cap on the pipe, and drive the pipe into the shale, and just keep driving it in until water starts running out of the pipe. And then you, however you threaded the end of the pipe, you unthread it and pull the pipe out about a foot, and you have a full stream of ice cold, it's called an artesian well.
I know we used to do that on the Illinois River.
Yeah. And all of this on the other side was like the Romanoffs. This was our neighbors just down Squaw Creek, and they had a section of land. They had about 30 acres cleared that they put in, and the rest was timber. But they only ran about 10 head of cattle. And as we round the corner here was the boundary of the Bigelow's property, and they had 600. They had a section. They had 640 acres. But we had a 20-acre cleared field on the north side, and this was just a single dirt road that followed Squaw Creek, and it was right down on Squaw Creek. So when Squaw Creek flooded, the road was flooded.
So these Romanoffs, they were Russians, huh?
They were Russians. He spoke very, very good English. Of course, he was the Romanov, but his wife was Russian, Ukrainian, and she had a very, very thick, distinct accent. And legend had it that they were of the Romanov dynasty in Russia. And those were the last Tsar of Russia.
So there's French Gulch right there. You were talking about that earlier.
Yeah. And so as we followed, this would have been all the property that the ranch that we're on. And so a lot of it's still, it's overgrown now, but how many years ago was that? 52 years ago, 55 years ago. We had big meadows that were cleared and stuff in here.
Well, there's a farm up the road here a couple miles.
Yeah, the farmhouse might still be there. But this, I'm disoriented because I would have been uphill from the farmhouse a good 500, 600 feet. And it would have been following Squaw Creek.
This way.
This is to the lake. This isn't the road. This road did not exist. Because Squaw Creek is right down below us.
Oh, that's French Gulch.
Yeah.
We'll be back on Squaw Creek. This just kind of goes around.
But it was just a dream for a kid. I'd lived on a farm all during elementary school, right on the Jackson, Josephine County border, and we lived right on the Rogue River on the north shore of the river. So anyway, like I said, we got a chance to really hone our skills. And my father was a wheeler dealer, and he was always buying a section of land out in the middle of the wilderness, or a half a section, and he'd build a couple of houses a year as a cash crop, and he traded for rural property. He tried to buy this the Seventh-day Adventist. He tried to buy the very ranch that we worked on because the people were getting too old to work it. And I was really hoping he would, and I was hoping that he would park me out there and park my brother out there and let us run the ranch, because we essentially ran it for 3 months. So, oh, I remember all this. There was nothing here. These were all just dirt trails, and these are part of the dirt trails that we took part of this to get up to the spring range. This was just like deer trails and things here.
Was there a road that went to Squaw Lake?
The Squaw Creek, there was a road right along Squaw Creek that the logging trucks took. That was the only road. That was the last road on the upper Applegate on this side of the river until you hit well into California. And that was the only way to get into Squaw Lake. And on the weekends, the old man would have to close the roads because the kids would come up there to drink beer, and they would shoot at the cows in the pastures. And we had a big 500-gallon fuel tank, and one time they cut the rubber hose on the fuel tank to steal the fuel and then just let the fuel run into the creek. So the old man put in a big iron gate, and he had a sign down there that said, "Honk if you want to come through the gate."
Well, I bet you that old gate's probably still there, probably lying in the weeds somewhere. And
he'd let the kids through, but he'd give them a lecture. And he said, if there's any mischief done going up there, I know who's been on this road. He was a hard case. Like I said, it was a dream for a couple of kids like my brother and I, that every chance we got, we get our mom to haul us up to Bolin and Tannen lakes, which in the wintertime she'd haul us within about 3 or 4 miles of the lake, and then it was snowed in, and we'd hike in on the snow for the rest of the time, to stay for a week. Then she'd come back in a week and pick us up. And that's a pretty good character building stuff. And it's maybe noteworthy that brother, my brother Harold, who's a year older, He and I are the only two family members to that point in history that ever went to college and got a college degree. And he got a college degree in engineering from Brigham Young University. He's a Mormon. And I went on to, while I was in the Navy, to pick up some college degrees. But we were the only two of the whole family that had any interest in schooling. And we were the two wilderness kids.
I brought Uncle Harold up here about 5 years ago. We went fishing at Little Squaw Lake.
Oh, how nice.
And I showed him my fishing spot.
Yeah.
I don't think we caught any fish that day. They weren't biting. I've done really good here before in the past. So there's
Okay.
cutthroat trout here in the lake.
Okay.
And he was showing me the old ranch that was, it's not there anymore, but it was across the lake. It was right on the lake, and he's telling me he used to work there on there.
He's my brother's memory, long-term memory, is not that good because we lived, the ranch was actually 3 miles east down the creek from Squaw Lake was where the ranch house was. It wasn't on the other, unless you had him on the other side of the lake.
Well, I think that maybe that was
maybe
part
so.
of the ranch was on the lake.
No, it wasn't.
I've stopped here and camped at this spot a few times.
Yeah.
I like this spot.
And these squirrels, you see, we used to,
But we're on Squaw Creek right now.
we used to bounty hunt the squirrels for Romanoff and the Bigelows. And we had to bring the tails of the squirrels in to prove we killed them. And we got 10 cents a tail. And the reason that the ground squirrels, at that time they had elevated irrigation ditches that brought water in from Squaw Lake. And the ground squirrels would dig into the side of the irrigation ditches and just defeat the whole ditch. And the Forest Service gave us 75 cents a nose for porcupines. But I never really had the heart to shoot a porcupine. And if you shot them anyway, they would just hang on to the limb of the tree and you'd have to climb the tree to get them out. And but the squirrels, I had no trouble murdering ground squirrels.
Yeah, we're starting to get into some of the slaty gossans here.
Yeah. Yeah, we're starting to get into some of the igneous rock, some of the
this is
granite.
Metamorphic right here.
Yeah, this is. That's granite.
Serpentine.
That's granite, isn't it?
No, I think it's. I believe that's serpentine.
I will take you. You're the man when it comes
But it could be porphyry.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing some.
Oh yeah, you
green
see the
there.
layering here. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
But it's kind of a slaty gossan.
Yeah, you can see the lithocline here. So there's either a fault on this side pushing the rocks over this way. You can see where the layers were laid down. So you're absolutely right. That's sedimentary.
Well, it's metamorphic. It's greenstone or serpentine.
You're the man.
Greenstone, schist. It's the schist.
Yeah, these pines and firs weren't even alive when I was up here. They were probably all logged out.
Next.
Yeah, so it looks like we're back on the old original road because it generally followed the creek. But the condition of the road now is like a freeway compared to what it was then. And this is really nice and leveled. But just picture this road with at least 50 logging trucks making a run down twice a day and then a run back up twice a day, and coming around here to these corners as fast as they could go because time was money.
You'd be getting one truck about every 6.5 minutes.
Just all day long. And Mr. Bigelow would go into the service stations in town. There was an old guy that had a sprinkler truck, and he'd go to buy all the waste oil when you change your oil at the service stations. And he'd get all the waste oil, and right in front of the farmhouse for about 1,000 feet before the barns to about 500 feet after he'd oil it, because the logging trucks really had the dust coming up, and had a lot of near misses on the road with the trucks coming up from the cut area back down to the cut area. But again, most of this area here, this is all new growth since I was a kid.
Now, there's an old jade mine up here I heard about up on the hill.
You'll notice that one way that you can classify a climate is the vegetation. So we have got in, we've either had an altitude change or sun angle change or something, but you're beginning to see a lot more deciduous trees, a lot more leafy trees, and less pines.
Oh, we'll be into more pines here when we get up here a little bit.
And you'll see that also because the first thing that comes in, even like we learned off of Mount St. Helens, the first thing that comes back is the pines.
Well, I can see a bunch of monardellas down there, but they're all dried out, so I think I'm a little too late for the coyote mint.
There you go.
When you get the coyote mint, but they're all...
And I am remembering this, because this had, these are probably, some of these trees, looks like I've had a burn or two in up here. But I remember hiking all over. There's a bunch of mines, old abandoned mines and exploratory shafts all over the sides of these hills. And when we rarely had time off, but on Saturdays on the Sabbath, if they didn't haul us in to attend the Seventh-day Adventist church with them, neither one of us were Adventists, but we weren't asked, we were told we were going to go with them. We just hiked these mountains just to see what was behind them. Take the dog with us, take our .22 rifle with us, and we saw a lot of black bear up in here. There was still a lot of black bear. But the old Adventist, he and his wife are vegetarians, so the animals were in no danger from them up here. But the black bear are very shy, and we'd usually see them around the edges of the field. They were to be coming down to the irrigation ditches that ran around the fields to get water. And also blackberries. So around the edges of the fields were just big mountains of blackberries.
Okay, we should be coming on to a farm here within the next mile or so.
Okay.
And then after the farm is about 3 more miles to the lake.
Okay. Yeah, that might be the old farm. Because he had, his property was a square mile. And we may have been, the Romanovs were probably part of what I was remembering as the Bigelows was probably the Romanovs. But you can see this timber here, this is all either been replanted or new growth.
Yeah, that's all reprod there.
Yeah, since I was a kid. Because those trees are only probably 30 years old, 35 years old.
I remember Grandma telling me how you guys used to come up here when you were kids to Squaw Lake and pick mushrooms.
Yeah. Now, Mom, when I was a junior or freshman in high school, Mom and I joined a mushroom club, and really interesting people, mushroom gatherers. And one lady was had come up from California, and she was a songwriter, and she would write like music and things for movies, and they had money. And but we would go once a week to classes, and they would teach us about you know, how mushrooms grew, what to look for, what sort of areas. The stuff that Philip here is probably the world-class expert on, but also teaching us which ones were edible, and if we weren't sure, how to test them whether they're edible. And if you got 2 people, you have one person take a small bite. And about the only deadly ones that we up in here, that in the area lot of years, but was the Ammonitis, or something they called nightshade, were the really deadly ones in the areas that...
Destroying angel.
There you go. Those are the only ones I remember. They might have told us other ones. But we'd come up after a rain, or we come up. I don't remember that much about it. Mom continued to be a picker with her group for years, and they came. This was a good area to come up in. Was the Upper Applegate.
So what year was that when she started doing that?
About 1958.
So that would have been about the year Mom graduated from high school then.
Your mom graduated in 58. Arthur graduated in 59. Harold would have graduated in 60, but he redid the first grade because he had been in a body cast for almost a year. It looks like they fortified the road here.
Oh yeah.
That is really nice. Just beautiful work. And I've never been on this road. The old road to Squaw Lake was just followed. The whole thing would flood in the wintertime. And they put this road. I remember that I seeing survey crews. They must have known back in the late 50s they were going to put the dam in, and that they were going to have to reroute some of the roads and stuff, because they were sticking stakes in the ground. I also remember as a little kid, this guy was way up the Rogue River, way up on the side of the hills, and he was putting stakes in the ground with flags. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Red, we're going to put in a freeway here." I said, "What's a freeway?" And that became Interstate 5. And that was back in the early 1950s when they were surveying that. And I just could not imagine that they were going to be putting in like a 8-lane or 4-lane or 6-lane freeway.
Yeah, I think they put that in during the 60s, didn't they?
There had strips of it were in, by 1959 they had completed certain sections of it, and us kids would get up there and we'd take the work road up, and we'd drag race on the strips of the freeway. And yeah, just come on around here like an idiot. Yeah, there we go. And
yeah.
so, by the way, I have Texas license plates on my car, so I'm sure these Oregonians assume I have a gun in the car. So it makes their driving manners a little better.
If they're out here, they probably have a gun too.
Oh, that's true too.
I want to stop for some blackberries here in a minute. I think I saw some back there.
Okay.
I'm seeing a lot of green ones now.
Yep. And I'm a master woodworker, so my mouth is watering when I see some of this fallen wood out here. I'd like to drag it back to my wood shop in El Paso.
Well, maybe we'll find a couple chunks to throw in the back of your truck before the day's over.
I've got when Bill Feedham is, the guy's a master cabinet maker, and he's 99 years old, and he's going to give me his hardwood that he's got left over.
Was Bill 99?
Bill's only 96, I think.
Yeah, his brother was 99.
Yeah, his brother's 99.
Okay, we're coming. There's Squaw Creek. We're just passing over it now.
Yeah. The old road was on the other side of the creek. You crossed the creek a couple of times going to the lake, but there were definitely no bridges.
No.
Well, that's been put in the last.
Keep your eye out for blackberries. If you see any nice ones, go ahead and stop.
Okay. I don't see any.
There's some chicory right there. Those purple flowers.
Yeah. Make you some tea, huh?
Chicory. You make coffee out of the roots.
Yep.
Decaffeinated coffee. It's a good coffee substitute if you don't mind it not having caffeine.
weren't really a lot of people using Squaw Lake back then. It wasn't, it was mostly the kids from Jackson County that, you know, would come up here for, back then we called it sparking. So I don't know what they call the making out now, but they'd come up here for their beer parties and stuff.
Sparking, that probably had something to do with cigarettes or smoking.
No, it had to do with
throwing sparks.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, making sparks. Rubbing two Girl Scouts together or something. But yeah, this brings back a lot of memories. It was pretty much looked like this back then. But you're right, because I think I'm looking over here. The old road used to be on the other side.
There's the pasture right there.
That big clearing right there, I think is this was the 60-acre clearing. Yeah. Or the 20-acre. We had a 20-acre and a 60-acre that we mowed.
It's kind of nice to revisit your childhood stomping grounds.
Well, you know,
you're blessed that it's still here and it hasn't all burnt yet, you know.
Well, you need to do it because that's over 60 years ago, and 65 years ago, and your memory, especially spatial things like how far things were away from each other.
The old gate right down there that you're talking about. We don't want to go down there though, that's private.
Well, this road wasn't here. The road was on the other side of the field. And the way we would irrigate it is, yeah, that's the field right there. The way we'd irrigate it is that we had the right to block the creek up, and we just take the bulldozer right in the creek and make a dam and force the water out of the
no, that old barn was probably there when you were...
No, that's not the old farmhouse. That's way too new.
So they probably tore the old one down and built
it, you know.
It was old back when you were...
Yeah, but this wasn't here. This has all been built in the last 65 years. But it was all, this is all cleared though. It was just like this. And the upper meadow here, when Harold and I got here, you couldn't do anything in the upper meadow because it was so full of rocks. You couldn't mow it or anything. So when we didn't have anything better to do, we took the hay wagon and we would go up and literally pick the rocks up and then dump the rocks in the creek bed or along the creek bank for the Squaw Creek. And that's how I got the only major injury I had. We'd gotten our butts chewed out for knocking one of the gate posts down with the big hay wagon. It had big steel tires on it, and we'd load up full of rocks, and Harold was driving the tractor, and I stood next to the gate post to tell him how close he was getting. It was just barely fit, and he ran over my foot with the hay wagon, and fortunately I had boots on, but it sunk my foot like into the ground, maybe 8 or 10 inches, but it just made hamburger out of my big toe and the toe next to it. So they hauled me up to the farmhouse, and the old lady ran a bucket, a regular 5-gallon bucket, and she dumped salt in it and soaked my foot in it. And then the toenail was gone, it was just mangled. And then put turpentine and water in the same bucket and soaked my foot for an hour, and then wrapped my whole foot up, bandaged it up, because it would have been at least a 3-hour ride over dirt roads into Jacksonville. And then we were baling hay in the afternoon, so I got a break and I got to ride the jump seat on the hay baler, and I had to sit there, and every couple of minutes I would have to snap the string on the baler and adjust the tension on the bales of hay so the string wasn't too tight and it wasn't too loose. So I got a kind of a light duty for about a week. But there was no taking a week off because your foot hurt. Work still had to be done, so I hopped around on one foot for a couple of weeks. It was about a month before I could put my boot back on. But I took my regular, just ankle-high work shoes and just cut the toe out of it. So my toe was hanging out of the front of it. In fact, when we drove back there, when we went around French Gulch to get off the road and into the wilderness, I had my my air drying toe.
A couple years ago, I was up by Fish Lake picking mushrooms, and I tripped and I fell on my wrist, and I broke my wrist. And instead of going to the hospital, I just took some duct tape and some newspaper and I set it myself.
I love it.
And then it took about 6 weeks or so before I took the cast off.
Yeah.
I let it go for 6 weeks and I took it off. It was still a little sore. It stayed sore for a couple of years after that, actually. It seems like it only stopped hurting about a year ago.
Well, I might have done a first aid. That laurel, look at it in here. Well, you don't want to get that stuff burning. It's hot enough to...
Madrone? Yeah. A lot of people call it laurel, but it's actually madrone.
Yeah.
We do have bay laurel that does grow up here.
Well, that's all I've ever heard it called.
We got
I've never seen...
too.
But, you know, you should know. I mean, we didn't know just what people told us, but...
Well, there may be some laurel up here. I think I saw one there.
But if you look back there,
they got smaller leaves.
That one tree back there, like this right here.
That was a madrone.
Yeah, you would never see a laurel tree ever get that large around the base, or that growing up that tall, because they're more of a bush, like myrtle or manzanita.
Yeah. I picked a lot of bay myrtle when I went to the coast a couple of weeks ago. I got a bag full of the bay leaves for cooking.
Yeah.
I like to take one of those leaves and I make a big stew and I'll put a bay leaf in it. But I get all my bay leaves here out in the woods. Most of my herbs I pick out in the woods that I use or in my yard.
Now, myrtle's an interesting wood. So is yew wood.
Oh yeah, there's yew out here too.
Because it only grows a few places on Earth, especially yew wood. And one of the places it grows is along the Oregon coast, or at this particular latitude. And it makes fantastic wood for making a bow.
Well, you know, in Europe, and it may be still true in some parts of Europe, that it was against the law for anybody to cut down a yew tree.
Okay.
They were considered to be property of the king, and they were a military asset
for longbows.
For making arrows and bows, yeah.
I'll be darned. Didn't know that. See, I learned something every day.
And there's some yew trees in England that are upwards to 1,000 years old.
Yeah. The one thing Harold and I did do is we returned back up to the farm and up to the Roloffs, and I forget the Fergusons lived on the other side of the river. We returned many, many times to visit and to go hunting, and right before Christmas to get mistletoe. And we'd get mistletoe and make it into small bundles and sell it in town, because the stores would sell mistletoe around Christmas time. But this is definitely a new road. You know, I'd never been on this road. It's interesting, we passed, well, one car going the same direction we are, several coming out of Squaw Lake.
Squaw Lake's pretty popular. You're probably going to get up there and find that every single camping spot's probably going to be occupied.
Back then it was all, when the Ccc Camps, the Civilian Conservation Corps, that Harry Truman put together after the Second World War. So many men came back from the war and were unemployed, so they used them.
Look at those mushrooms growing on that tree there.
Yeah. In fact, two of my older brothers worked up in these areas in the Ccc Camps, and they put all of the national parks in. They put all the campsites in. And I think they put some primitive camps in at the lake.
Well, there's probably some switchbacks that went up the hill from the farm to the lake, I imagine.
I don't, well, you had to follow the creek. There was nothing up here at this altitude except the trails that we would take the cattle into the spring range.
So there was no actual road going to the lake?
Yes, it followed Squaw Creek.
Oh, I see it.
But it followed Squaw Creek, but it stayed on the northern side of Squaw Creek.
It was pretty much just an old wagon or mining road.
This wasn't anything. This wasn't here. And unless the logging companies might have put it in, to get the logs out, they might have come in and knocked the road out.
Well, they probably put this road in the 60s.
Yeah, because back...
Because this road's always been here since I've been a little.
Yeah, because back in the 50s, the only way to get to Squaw Lake was to go right through our ranch and you followed the creek all the way up. And back then on the dirt road, it took an hour because you just couldn't go very fast.
And I remember I'd come up here, and I think I was probably 16 years old when I first started driving.
Yeah.
The first time I came up here, and I'd have the whole place to myself. There'd be nobody up here. And I remember the big Squaw Lake, there was a road that went all the way around it.
Yeah.
And there was cabins all along that lake. And I don't think those cabins are there anymore.
Yeah.
Or they might still be, but I mean, they'd be in pretty bad shape if they are still there.
Somebody developed in about a year and a half after, because we came up in 1959, and there was it was a lot more developed.
Okay, so that's the road to the big lake right there.
Yeah.
And that's usually where I park, and we just walk into the lake.
That's the only lake that I know. I don't know that there's a little lake.
Yeah, there's a little lake. We can drive to the little lake, or we can just park here and walk to the lake. But
not me.
You really can't drive to the big lake anymore. You used to be able to.
Okay.
But I actually haven't been to that big lake in probably 30 years. I'd like to go to check it out.
But they were cutting. This probably was a logging road, because they were cutting a lot. Of course, they had to get access to the woods.
Well, Grandma used to come up here to pick mushrooms up in this area.
Yeah. But somebody got, maybe it was a state forest service or something.
Can you see the lake down there?
Oh yeah.
I don't see it.
Yep.
I see a lot of smoke.
Maybe that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good hike down into there. I probably not gonna.
But all these fences and stuff and the picnic tables were probably put in the 1940s, the late 1940s, by the Civilian Conservation Corps. And the national parks really didn't have anything before 1948, and they were just it was like an army of young men that were unemployed, and they paid them room and board and probably $10 or $15 a day to put in all those trails, hiking
I
trails.
don't even think they paid them that much. I think they got like,
who knows,
$1 a day, I think.
Yeah. I know that my older brother Irwin and Junior, and a lot of kids we knew, well, I was only 5 years old, 6 years old then. I think I remember about these. Everybody came home and they had the big parades for them, and all that stuff. And I came back from Vietnam and came in through the San Francisco airport and had a hippie spit in my face. I was in uniform when I got off the plane, and I had been drinking, qualify that, and he had an earring on it. I just ripped the earring out of his ear. He spit in my face, so I had an earring, bloody earring in my hand. So that was my welcome home. I didn't get a parade. Still haven't gotten my parade.
San Francisco hippie with an earring.
Yeah, the right
that
there.
That would have meant something back then.
Right there at the airport.
Was it the right ear or the left ear?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is a little Squaw Lake here.
Yeah, I might have been here. I think, yeah, because we, this might have been one of the trails that we drove the cattle on for the spring range.
No, this is, I've camped here before. This is a nice little area to camp. Yeah. We park right here, and then we walk down, down in there. That was my favorite camp spot, right down in there.
Okay.
And then there's really...
Oh yeah, look at that. Those are pretty nice. Pretty nice area.
This road don't go very much farther.
Yeah,
but we'll go up to the end of it and turn around and come back.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're on the opposite side of the river that I remember when in the second week of August, after the final mowing of the hay and baling, and we'd let the cattle onto the big 60-acre and the 30-acre fields we had and let them munch on all the leftovers, potato chips probably for them. And we'd follow the other side of the river up to right at the California border, or maybe just a little bit over. And Phil knew the name of the creek. I could never remember it, and I couldn't find it on a map because all of this was, none of this was underwater. And on the other side of the hill here, by the side was now the lake, were 3 farms. And what stuck out with me about the farms was all 3 of the farms, the houses were made out of solid rocks that they'd picked up and used. Maybe they made their own mortar from the mud or something, but and the roofs were shakes, and they were hand-cut shakes, which are thick wooden shingles. And all 3 of the houses were fed by artesian water. It just came right out of they put a pipe into the side of the hill. And Mr. Bigelow, we would go quite a ways upstream where it was shallow, and he would take his hay baler. We'd take the tractor, the rake, the hay baler, the mower, and we'd go do all of their hay fields. And we would do it for a certain number of bales of hay, or he would do it just to be a good neighbor, I don't know. And I remember that those were some real characters, some real hermits living in those places. And the one place, a couple of German brothers, neither one of them ever been married. One of them was missing the little toe and the toe next to it. And the story has it that they were putting shake roof shingles on, and the one brother was teasing the other, and he kept putting his foot over, and the other brother swung at him with a hatchet, and I guess they got their timing off, and he chopped a couple of his toes off. But that was one thing I remembered about them. And I remember that they had a pet red-tailed hawk, and the hawk was always sitting on the railing on their front porch. And every once in a while they would take off and come back with a mouse or a squirrel or something. And I can't remember their name. Their name was, they were German. All 3 of those families were Germans. And where we took the cattle across was quite a bit above the last farm, and Elliott Creek. And we would take the cattle. We had it was a narrow enough cattle trail that just one cow at a time could go on the trail. So we had to keep the cattle from bunching up because of one of the calves wanted to get too close to his mother. If he got kicked over the side of that cliff. It was about 150 feet of sharp rocks down to the creek. So
And that was on the north side, or this side?
we were on the north side of Elliott Creek, going up to one of the upper Bureau of Land Management ranges that any of the Oregonian farmers could use. You had to schedule your time. Copper Boat Lodge.
Yeah, that's the old Copper Road right there. It goes down to
the last city. We went beyond the city of Copper before we crossed the river. And the city, I like to say city, had 2 people in it. And it was just a little store. And the store was also their house. And they mainly sold beer to the logging truck drivers, because there was a logging road that went into California on the eastern side of the Applegate River. As the Applegate River runs, it's not like most rivers in North America that run either east and west, or they run from the north and south. The Applegate River actually is made up of a bunch of creeks to the south, and it runs due north into the Rogue River. And it's kind of one of the unusual rivers. And to me is one of the most untapped, beautiful valleys ever in Oregon. And I don't know why it wasn't settled more than it was back in the 1800s. It would have been a lot of work, but these hills must be just full of gold. Just untapped gold, if people knew where to look for it. Because it never has been properly mined. Like the Rogue River, all the banks of the Rogue River have been big placer mines where they would blast the rocks and everything. Now this
is Carberry Creek here.
Okay.
And then Elliott Creek goes that way.
Yeah. I am just, after talking to my nephew Phil here, I am just positive now, and I'll have to get with my brother Harold, whose memory is worse than mine. He's 80. He's 80 going on 100. I'm 79 going on 50. But I'll bet you if I mention Elliott Creek, that's going to ring a bell. And like I said, it was one of just really the high points of the summer. Was we had all the hay in for the winter. We really had most of the heavy work on the ranch done. So about the only real work we did was one of us would live on the ground in a sleeping bag up on the high range with the cattle. And we didn't try to drive them anywhere or make them go anywhere. We would just move the salt lick to try to keep them. We had them graze usually on the southwestern part of the range first, and then we'd move the salt lick closer and closer and closer back to where we would be exiting back around the gulch on. I called it French Gulch, but I don't think that was the name of the gulch around Elliott Creek. French Gulch is the.
Well, there's Manzanita Creek we're coming on over here.
Okay.
Now I had a question for you. Were people around here generally aware of the Applegate jade back then?
No. Most of the people here would pan the river. Like after a big flood or a big raid, they'd go up the creek beds and they'd walk up the creek beds, including the Bigelows, and look for a bend in the creek. And they'd dig out the gravel and dig out the black sand where the heavy metals were deposited. It's like a low-hanging fruit, and they could usually pan out an ounce or two of gold after a big rainstorm. But other than gold, nobody was picking up jade. They might not even have been aware of it.
Well, I found out about it from doing research on the gold, and the Chinese miners had come in here, and they would take wagon loads full of this jade rock back to the coast. I think they'd take it to Gold Beach.
Okay.
And then they'd get on ships and they'd use it as ballast. They'd go that way.
Yeah.
Then they'd take it and they'd sell it they'd sell it as jade in China.
Yeah. No, I heard that also. And from Mr. I want to say his name is Darusha. That seems to ring a bell with me. And that was 1957, so I'm guessing his age, he was probably born in 1880. And he had lived most of his life in the upper Applegate as a little boy. So he would have remembered all that. The Chinese workers they brought in to put in the railroad spur lines. They had all sorts of spur lines to haul timber. Grants Pass used to be one of the big railroad hubs. Grants Pass, Oregon. We had a big turntable there, and they would turn the trains around, the ones that were coming up out of California, and they would turn them around so they could go to the north or go out to the different timber spur lines. And the railroad was a big business in Grants Pass and Jackson County. In fact, my grandfather and my uncle both worked for the Southern Pacific at one time or other as laborers or something. So, but yeah, now that you mentioned that, until you had mentioned the jade and the Chinese, and that cute a memory of Mr. Darusha, who he made his own beer, and he'd love, after a couple of big mugs of beer, to start telling us a little bit about the history.
And if you guys are wondering what jade is, that's this stuff right here.
That's Uncle Cal's right now. So
yeah.
But if any of you viewers,
that's Uncle Cal's honorarium for today's video.
But I want you guys to give Phil's site a thumbs up and subscribe, and send him comments and tell him to annotate more, because he knows the name. He knows the first name of every bush and rock in the upper Applegate, and tell him what you want to see more of, or what you want to hear more of. Here's a rural camp. Some people are got their solar panels out in the middle of the trees. That's not going to do much good. But let him know, because I've encouraged him to talk a little bit. He's very interesting. He's very funny.
Yeah, go down here.
And we're following right now. We're on the trail. We're probably crossing. This is probably what's left of the Applegate.
This is Elliott Creek right here.
Okay, this is Elliott Creek. So we would have crossed this with the cattle, and if Phil will point his camera up into those trees, that looks like the path that we took. And if you stay on that, you pick up Elliott Creek again, and you'll climb up about 800 feet or 900 feet in altitude. And right now, let's see what our altitude.
Well, this road here goes deeper into California. If you follow it, it takes you to.
But see, this road here probably did not exist. There was nothing.
Oh yeah, this did. This existed way back in the 1800s even.
Okay.
Because this takes you to.
So this is the road that'll take you into.
It'll take you to Eileen. The other road on the other side of the creek takes you further on up. It follows Elliott Creek.
Okay.
But this road only follows Elliott Creek for a little ways, and then it goes up Joe's Creek.
Yeah. But this is the farthest south that summer that I ever worked. I went the furthest south, and we may have turned here, but we may have followed Elliott Creek up further.
Let's go. Oh yeah, we can go. Let's go. Yeah, we can go here.
Yeah, we'll follow Elliott Creek a little bit. We may have gone up here.
We're only going to go up here about a quarter mile, and that's it.
I had my eyes full of dust, and I was looking at cattle butts all the way, and I was focused on keeping them on the road and out of the bushes. And we drove them from this point here to the top of the Bureau of Land Management range. It took us about 2 hours from here. And then once a week, somebody would walk up onto the range, and if I was up there, they'd relieve me on the range, and then I would walk back out. So we had horses, but my brother Harold and I, neither one of us liked to ride horses. And I still to this date do not like riding horses.
Yeah, so there's a little road going off down this way.
Okay.
Just take that and pull in there. And
Okay.
there's like a little parking area back in there, and we can just go in there and turn around.
Yeah.
Looks like there might be somebody already down there. No, nobody here.
Yeah. So we followed the creek, and right now, believe it or not, with these pine trees and everything, you would think, man, I must be up in the high Sierras or something. But the altitude in here, believe it or not, is only about 2,000 feet. And so the altitude is 2,000 feet. The latitude, we're 42 degrees north of the equator right here. And the latitude is 123 degrees. So if you follow that latitude, the middle of Oregon is exactly halfway between the equator and the North Pole.
And we're pretty much sitting on the California border right here.
Yeah, yeah, we're right. The California border, maybe the other side of the creek. So
we'll stop here for a minute.
Yeah. And he's going to get out and walk around a little bit. But the one thing that might be interesting to people that don't know much about Oregon or the Northwest is the ferns. Like we have ferns that grow here, and we get a lot of moss on the side of the north side of the trees because we never get enough sun, because the sun only comes 23.5 degrees north of the equator. And then it starts migrating south, so it never quite gets far enough north to keep the moss from growing on the back of the trees. So from
but you don't want to use that as your rule of thumb for navigation, because you might find places where the moss does grow on the south side of the tree.
Or the tree I'm looking straight ahead has got moss growing on all sides of it, because it's so shaded here. But generally, if you get a tree that's got a clearing with enough sunlight, and for all the tree huggers out there, there's way too many trees in these forests. There's like a weed patch, and it's not good for the environment. It's not good for the animals, because the light cannot penetrate through the canopy for good food grasses to grow.
Well, there needs to be a good mix, you know.
Yeah.
There needs to be,
Phil's a tree hugger, I'm not. So
there needs to be places where there's trees, and there needs to be places where there's meadows. You need a mix. That way you have the diversity.
Yeah. Well, we just kept climbing up in, and the ranges were back in here about 20 miles.
Yeah, somebody just put that claim in there too. That claim wasn't there a couple years ago.
Okay.
That sign right there.
Yeah. Got some bullet holes in it.
But there's some good gold in this creek, though.
Yep. There's gold in all these creeks. And every time you get a big flooding and stuff, it washes more materials down.
That's when I come here looking for jade, is right after the flood.
Yeah. It's really a shame that these people...
And then I also get Applegate diamonds out of this creek too, which is a type of quartz that's really, really clear. Super clear quartz. It's like glass.
Man, I can't tell you how much I'm enjoying this, Phil. I really appreciate this.
So I was going to walk down here, but it looks like the trail has been washed out or something here. Looks a lot steeper than it does last time I was here.
Now, all I need to do is fall, you know. This could have very well been the trail. And maybe even generally have followed the roadbed, but maybe not.
Yeah, I think this is the trail right down here. There's always so much trash here. This is disgusting. Okay, here's the
above the creek the whole time.
Here's the trail right here.
What was that trail on the other side?
So I'm just going to pop down here for a minute. I'll be right back. I just want to get... I'm just going to get a little bit of the footage here and maybe get a piece of jade while I'm down here. So this is one of the spots where I get jade, Applegate jade. It's actually a bowenite rock, and I have found some nice chunks here in the past, and I've found some nice chunks of quartz down here. But I'm thinking this late in the season, this stuff's probably pretty well picked over by now. I do see one piece right there that looks interesting. Yeah. Okay. Applegate jade. I'm going to grab that and bring it up. Unless I find something I like better. Applegate diamond. Too big for the saw. The Applegate jade right there. Now if you notice this rock, when I turn it, you're going to see a chatoyant streak come on through. See that? And when as you move the rock, you get the chatoyant look to it. It's like a cat eye jade.